Let's dive into part 1 of the code and take a look at its scope, organization, and intent. In 1999, the ASME PCC-2 subcommittee on repair and testing was established. The objective was to document recognized and generally accepted engineering practices. In reality, equipment repairs have been carried out since the installation of the very first pipeline, so the fundamental objective of this committee was to document and defend from a technical standpoint what was already being done. It's interesting to note that these committees work by a voting method to achieve consensus. The articles, as we've already mentioned, are relatively generic and can be adapted to the specific conditions of the failures at a particular industrial facility. The scope of ASME PCC-2 includes all equipment within the scope of ASME, such as Section 8 Division 1, Division 2, Division 3, ASME B31, etc. It includes piping and piping components such as valves, flanges, and fittings, boilers, pressure vessels including heat exchangers, and storage tanks. It's important to note that ASME PCC-2 may be used on equipment constructed in accordance with other codes and standards. There are many systems and codes that do not have a framework as broad and complete as ASME to define repairs, so in those cases we can also apply PCC-2. It's worth clarifying that this is not optimal, but if no other repair method or repair compendium is available, applying it will, in some ways, be better than nothing. As we already mentioned, this code covers repairs after the equipment has already been placed in service. Repairs during construction are covered by new construction codes in such cases. Now we ask ourselves, what is not covered or what can we not evaluate with PCC-2? Well, this code does not include requirements for new constructions, planning and preparation of inspections, risk studies and inspection plans, methods and techniques of in-service inspections, and flaw assessments and fitness for service evaluations. Each of the topics mentioned are covered by different codes or standards, which are integrated into PCC-2 to help the user maintain mechanical integrity. As we saw previously, this standard provides methods for the repair of equipment, piping, pipelines, and associated ancillary equipment after they have been placed in service. All repair methods included in this code include relevant design, fabrication, examination, and testing practices, and may be temporary or permanent repairs depending on the circumstances. Inspection and flaw assessment methods are not within the scope of ASME PCC-2, but are covered in other post-construction codes and standards such as API 510 or 570 for inspections, and later API 579 for flaw assessment, as we already mentioned. The intent of ASME PCC-2 is to provide technical information, procedures, and recommendations for repair methods that were determined by consensus to be recognized and generally accepted as good engineering practice. That's why we talk about guides and guidelines for repair, and also why we'll see throughout the course that there are a series of gray areas in the code that, in many cases, leave the choice of using one method or another in the hands of the designer or repairer. It should also be noted that when equipment repair is subject to local regulations, jurisdictional approval may be required. It's important to be very clear about the definitions of the words may, shall, and should as they're used in PCC-2 articles, since each one has a different purpose. It's essential to distinguish between them for a correct understanding of the code. May indicates an action that is permitted but not required. Shall indicates an action that is mandatory and is an essential element of the repair method that cannot be eliminated. Should is an action that's not mandatory. It indicates an action that, when performed, is generally considered to be good practice. However, there are some circumstances when the action is not appropriate or required, so the word should is used to provide flexibility for the article, covering a broad range of circumstances. It's not mandatory unless specified by other articles. Each of the code articles follows the same format. The repair method changes, but the structure is always the same. That way it's familiar and easy to read for the user. First, a description of the repair method is made. Then, the scope and limitations associated with the repair are defined. That is, on which equipment and under what circumstances said repair can be carried out. Then, if applicable, it goes over any design or fabrication issues associated with the repair itself. It then discusses examination and testing. And finally, if applicable, it lists publications referenced in the article. Administrative requirements, which are the records associated with technical requirements, include inspection reports, maintenance record, documentation requirements, approval and record requirements, etc. These are not contained in the PCC-2 standard. The PCC-2 standard does not contain this type of administrative or legal requirements. It focuses on technical issues associated with the repair itself, for example, guidance on recommended methods for performing repairs. Temporary versus permanent repairs. PCC-2 does not classify repairs as temporary or permanent. It's the responsibility of the owner or user to determine the expected useful life of each repair. There are many aspects that influence when determining whether a repair is temporary or permanent. A temporary repair is basically a repair that's done urgently until there's an opportunity to make a permanent repair, although this is not defined in PCC-2, as it does not define what a temporary or permanent repair is. What it does provide is a series of repair methods so that the user can choose and apply an appropriate repair. Technical considerations affecting the expected life of the repair are stated in the individual articles to allow the user to properly determine inspection and replacement intervals. Why doesn't PCC-2 define whether a repair is permanent or temporary? It's because the expected life of a repair depends on many factors, including repair design, number and magnitude of temperature and pressure cycles, that is, if we talk about cyclical or non-cyclical services, the time under different load conditions, the environment regarding an internal or external flaw, the consequence of failure and risk tolerance, since intervening on a critical pipeline is not the same as on a non-critical one. In the introduction, reference is made to welding. Whenever we talk about welding and the different repair methods, the applicable construction code or the PCC itself must always be followed except where otherwise indicated. The same applies to the concept of allowable stress. For calculations involving the allowable stress from the original construction code or post-construction code is used unless otherwise specified in specific articles. Now we ask ourselves, what is allowable stress? This concept may seem very basic, but it's essential to be clear about it since it will be discussed in the different passages and repair sections. Allowable stress is a design value, which is related to the mechanical properties of the material. This image shows a tensile test. In this test, a standardized specimen is subjected to stress until failure is reached. As the test is carried out, both the applied stress and the elongations produced in the specimen are measured to then obtain the stress-strain curve. In this curve, we can see point A, which represents the elastic limit. This is the point from which the material will suffer permanent plastic deformations. For some steels, the stress at this point is the yield point of the material. Point B is the point of maximum resistance or the breaking limit. It's the point where the maximum stress is reached, also known as UTS, ultimate tensile strength. And finally, point C, which is where the test specimen breaks. The stress used in the design will always be a value lower than the elastic or yield limit, so as to ensure that irreversible plastic deformations will not occur in the material. The allowable stress is not a value that's established randomly, but rather is a design value that's obtained based on the type of material and the temperature, since the properties of the material change with changes in temperature. Approximately and generically speaking, this value is usually 2/3 of the yield. Here we can see this quite clearly. If we work with division 1, the safety coefficient is 3.5, and if we work with division 2, it will be 2.4. The allowable stress is calculated as the lowest value between 2/3 of the elastic limit or the ultimate tensile strength divided by the design factor. Why is it greater in one case than another? Because when we work with rules, the analysis is more superficial than in the case of a design by analysis where we obtain the induced forces in greater detail. So what we saw previously is where the allowable stress comes from. How do we see this? We can go to ASME Section 2, Part D, where we'll find the tables of different materials. Table 1A, as seen on the screen, is applicable to ASME 8, Division 1. There we can see that the allowable stresses of different materials are tabulated as a function of temperature. The allowable stress is important for repairs since the materials used for repairs must have at least the same allowable stress as the base material. To finish this lesson, we'll quickly comment on the classification of steels. There are many ways to classify steels, with differences depending on the source consulted. According to ASME SA 941 standard, which provides the definitions of steel groups, they're classified as carbon steels, alloy steels, low alloy steels, and stainless steels.